This is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday. My guest today is Wenda Sheard.
Hi.
Wenda and I are both members at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, and she's a person who has lived here in Athens for quite a long time. When did you first come to Athens, Wenda?
Well, I first came in 1979 when I graduated from law school.
79.
Mm-hmm.
That was after you graduated from college?
From law school.
Oh, from law school.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, where are you from originally?
I was born in Cincinnati, and my parents moved to Cleveland, and I started kindergarten in Chicago. My parents moved back to Cleveland, and then when I was, they moved to northern Michigan. We lived on the shore of Lake Superior for another year of kindergarten all the way through third grade.
My goodness.
Then we moved to Cleveland Heights, Ohio for fourth and fifth grade, and right at the end of fifth grade moved to the Ludlow area of Shaker Heights, Ohio in
Shaker Heights.
Yeah, in April 1965, and that was significant because Ludlow was at the forefront of the civil rights movement.
Ah, yes.
That's why my parents moved there. And then I went to college in Cleveland, Case Western, and then Cleveland State. I went to Cleveland State Law School.
Oh, yes.
And came down here right after that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've been here 38 years, is my quick
There are 16 years that are missing.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
You went some other places,
Oh, yes.
of course.
Yes.
During that time.
Many other places.
Many other places. Well, we're sort of similar. We say we've been here over 50 years, and we have, but we have spent a couple of sabbatical years, elsewhere, Northern Virginia, near Washington, D.C., one year, in the home of my uncle and my late uncle and aunt, actually. We stayed at their place once. And we were overseas in England.
We
twice.
were also.
Yes.
For 5 years.
5 years. You were in England, and you've fairly recently returned. Isn't that correct?
3 years ago.
3 years ago. I knew it was fairly recent. But you had been coming back since you have property here in Athens County. Lovely place out in the country.
Thank you. We like it.
However, I understand you have a few problems on the Dutch Creek Road with dust and potholes, or maybe this is what I read in the newspapers.
Yeah, I've read it in the newspapers too, and yes, there is dust when it's dry, and there are potholes that develop. But the county engineer's been really good about getting those fixed when
that's
they get
good.
bad. He's working as well as he can.
Yeah, I know I've been out there fairly recently, and to get to Dutch Creek Road, you really have to go out the old Route 33 that goes through, goes under the 33, and goes around and up a hill and all that, and it's at the top of one of those hills that you have to turn and go up an even steeper hill, which is Dutch Creek Road.
That's right. You go out State Route 550.
Okay, that's what it's called.
And then the place that you turn to start on Dutch Creek Road is the top of Dividing Ridge, which you then turn, and you do go up even further.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I've been out there a couple of times, and in fact, I remember one very nice occasion when a bunch of us women were sitting around the outdoor fire, toasting marshmallows and.
Oh yes, we're both Girl Scouts at heart.
Yes. Former Girl Scouts, or
that's true.
whatever. Actually, I'm a life member, but I was a girl member, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. probably now. Yeah, 70
know.
years ago now. Hard to believe it's that long. But anyway, so we have you located in place and time. And you are a professional woman. And you mentioned law school.
Yes, yes. I am a lawyer, that's true. I am practicing part-time now.
Part-time.
Just purposely only practicing no more than 25 hours a week. I'm selective in the cases and the types of things I'll take.
Yes. Well, I know you did a very nice job for me when I was revising my will in the spring. So there's one thing you do. I don't think you do, maybe you don't do court cases. Am I right about that?
I am doing limited court cases.
Limited court cases.
Yes, I've done some probate work. And I've done a name change work for some folks. And also in the year 2016, I went through training, the basic mediation training.
For mediation.
Yes, and the mediation training for those of us who want to mediate domestic relations cases.
Oh, yes.
The abuse mediation training, because you have to be able to screen for whether or not there's been abuse in a relationship before you can determine whether or not mediation is appropriate. And then I went through a type of training that's relatively new at the Ohio Supreme Court called parenting coordination training.
Parenting
Coordination, and I'm hoping that the Athens County Court of Common Pleas will enact parenting coordinating rules. That would take some of the pressure off the court for cases where the parties have divorced, but their divorce has been contentious.
Yes.
And they are likely to come back to court to fight more. Parenting coordinators that work in many counties in Ohio use their mediation training to help those people reach agreements, to go underneath what they're angry about at the moment, to reframe the issues, to figure out what really is important, and to have them focus on the children.
Right, that's so important.
And to focus on the fact that the children's childhood is only a very small part of the time that they'll be the parent of that child.
That's true, because they grow up too soon.
Yes, yes. But the difference between parenting coordination and mediation is the parenting coordinator has the power, assuming the court gives the parenting coordinator that power in that particular case, and assuming the court has passed a rule allowing parenting coordination. The parenting coordinator has the power to listen to both parties, and if for some reason they can't reach an agreement, say about a birthday party that weekend that the child really wants to attend, that it's one party's day or time with the child and not the other parties. If they can't reach an agreement, the parenting coordinator does have the power to make a ruling that's appealable to the court, but also enforceable by the court about what needs to happen here.
Interesting.
You don't really want to make a ruling because you want to get the parties to agree to something, and most of the time that's exactly
in the
what
best
you do.
interests of the child.
But I'm hoping that we'll go along with other counties in Ohio and have a parenting coordinator rule, and that will not only help couples in contentious relationships and their children, it will also help lessen the burden of the court system.
Well, I'm a child of divorce myself, although actually it didn't last too long as it happened. My parents were divorced in December of 1936, and I was 4 years old at the time. And it was amicable enough, you know, it was not really, there wasn't violence involved or anything like that, but my father wasn't in very good health. And actually, he wanted to have me for 9 months of the year. The mother my mother for 3 months of the year. But he found that was very difficult, you know, because he had to be employed. And when you have a 4-year-old who isn't even in school yet, that's really a difficult situation. So in the spring of 1937, they switched, and he got me for summers and she got me for school year. And I spent a wonderful summer with Daddy Ed at Lake Tahoe, where he was employed. It's a beautiful place, you know, and that was just the first of a number of years that I spent summers at Tahoe. But he died that winter in Arizona, Phoenix, which is currently in the news. And he's actually, he's buried there. So the divorce part didn't last too long. And I had a wonderful stepfather. So I have a half-brother who's 10 years younger than I am, you know. And so, but still, there was always a feeling there, you know, a feeling of problems and so on. And so it's so important that the children be considered, because of course they really hardly ever have anything to do with the actual divorce. So in a sense they are victims, you might say, of the divorce. Well, that's very interesting to find out about your attorney background. And I wanted to mention, I often talk about things that happen on the day that we do our program, which is August 23rd in this case. So I looked it up in my book of, you know, something for every day of the year type of things. And it was interesting that it was on August 23rd, 1927, that the infamous Sacco and Vanzetti execution took place, which you probably have never heard of, but was still quite well known when I was a young person. And because they had been convicted of a crime, a lot of people thought they had not committed the crime, but they were anarchists. You know, they were very left-wing people, and so I don't know that it's ever been really established, but there were many people who protested their being condemned to die, but they were eventually, about 7 years after the crime had been committed, on August 23rd, 1927, Sacco and Vanzetti met, I think, the electric chair, although I'm not sure. You know, it would have been pretty new in those days, I guess. Might have been old-fashioned hanging, who knows. But actually, one of the things we want to also talk about a good deal is an upcoming date, just a couple of days from now, is August 26th, and that's called Women's Equality Day. And it was made national observance was made of it in the 1970s. But it recognizes the women's right to vote, because it was on August 26, 1920, that the federal Secretary of State certified that the 19th Amendment to the Constitution had been passed, allowing women the right to vote, and a number of women voted right away. 1920 wasn't a presidential election year, you know. And so August 26th, and then the November election was just upcoming. Incidentally, that was the election where Franklin D. Roosevelt was on the ticket as vice president. He was the Democratic nominee for vice president. And that was before he became crippled with polio. which was something that I, as a child, was very aware of because he was the only president I ever knew for about 12 years since he became president in 1933, and then he died in 1945. So he was president all those years when I was born in 32. So anyway, Women's Equality Day is soon coming up, and actually the centennial of women's suffrage is going to be with us quite soon. We have this paper, which the Women's History Project put out, How Women Won the Vote. What they're doing is they're getting this out early so people can start thinking about, what's the good way to observe. Mm-hmm. For instance, the League of Women Voters, I know you're active with the League. Mm-hmm. I'm sure we'll be planning a celebration because it's not only the centennial of the women getting the vote, but also the centennial of the League of Women Voters itself, which was founded in 1920. Mm-hmm. So I've been quite active with the League over the years.
I know, I have proof.
Yes, you have proof.
Yes,
what's your proof?
Well, here's the latest League of Women Voters of Athens County booklet that you get if you join the League. And
right.
Can I make a little plug for joining the local League?
Oh, sure, please do.
Yeah, I was very active in the League back when I was in Athens from 79 until 98.
Uh-huh.
I served as vice president a couple
good.
of times, I believe. I could never be president because at the time I was working for a judge, being the staff attorney, law clerk for a judge, and that wouldn't have been proper because judges are elected on nonpartisan general election ballots.
Right.
So that's important for me to have not stepped into a role as president, as you did back in the 70s. I see right here, 75 to 77, Lois Whaley president.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a long time ago.
But the League is still active. I was thrilled to find that out when I came back to Athens 3 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And they do register many voters, and they do have candidate forums and issue forums.
Yes.
And they do welcome new members all the time. Tomorrow I'm going with one of the current League president to help register voters and tell people about the League of Women Voters at a table at Hawking College.
At Hawking College.
There's I think it's an orientation session where the students can go from table to table and learn about different opportunities outside their normal classrooms.
Yes.
And there's some sort of incentive. They come and they get a stamp at your table if they talk to you a while. I'll learn more tomorrow when I'm there.
Yes.
But I'm very excited to be able to talk about the League of Women Voters to Hawking College students and convince the newest generation that it is time for them, the 18, 19, 20-year-olds, the ones who aren't already registered to vote, really need to get registered to vote and start being active, as well as adults beyond that age who aren't yet registered to vote.
That's true.
Kind of disheartening to see people complain about politics to such an extent that they refuse to register to vote.
Well, that
just
makes things worse, for sure.
Oh, I know, and people don't understand that if they refuse to register to vote, that's a big problem. And I find that more and more. I was at the county fair.
You were at the county fair?
I was at the county fair serving in one of the booths of one of the political parties.
Right.
And I asked people if they wanted to register to vote, asked them if they'd wanted to sign a bipartisan citizens initiative to amend the Ohio Constitution to require that our U.S. congressional districts be drawn by the same bipartisan committee that the voters voted in 2 years ago to draw the state house and state senate districts.
Right.
I thought it would be a simple ask, but only registered voters are allowed to sign that petition. And the people I saw, many people I saw at the county fair said, I'm not registered to vote, and I don't want to register to vote. Now, there were a lot who, on the other spectrum, who came over and thanked us and told us they had already signed the petition elsewhere, and they were very happy we were working to
good.
get signatures
Yeah.
on the ballot.
Right. Well, you never know who you're going to meet at a county fair.
Well, or anywhere, even on the courthouse steps where we've tried to register voters and tried to get signatures for the Fair Districts petition, which is supported by leaders in both parties.
Yes.
It's not a
Yes, it
partisan
is.
issue. It's a bipartisan effort to
Right.
amend the Ohio Constitution, so a bipartisan commission will draw those U.S. congressional districts in Ohio.
Right.
It's disheartening, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop making the effort.
Yes,
So.
I know. My husband ran for office long time ago, actually 45 years ago. And we went to a lot of county fairs that year. And I have never, ever forgotten the young man at Logan County Fair. Again, I was in the political booth, you know, promoting my husband running for office kind of thing. And I said, are you registered to vote? You know, are you planning to vote? And so on. And he said, all politicians are criminals. They should be shot. Or something, you know, words to that effect. I practically fell over, you know, it was, I thought, gee, I hope we don't meet him one dark night, you know.
Well, I will tell you about a success story, at least I counted it as success.
Good.
When we were registering voters and trying to get people to sign the Fair Districts petition at the Athens Public Library, one fellow said at first, I'm not registered to vote, and I never want to vote, you know, I never want to be registered. I don't like politicians. He was about my age, and he was there with his wife. And I talked to him both before he went in the library and afterwards, and I told him that he needs to change that.
Yeah.
He needs to run for city council where he lives in an outlying area of the county. I said,
if he doesn't like what the government is
you
doing.
need to do that. You need to do this.
Yes, get involved.
And I was so happy when he left. He did say, I'll think about that.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
good.
counted that as a success. If we can get some of
Right.
the people who refuse to vote to run because they think things are bad, we need them to understand that the proper response is not refusing to vote. The proper response is running for office.
Right.
That's what you have to do. You
Yes.
have to run for office if you think things are terrible and all politicians are bad. It's your duty to your family, your children, and your grandchildren to get in the situation where you can make things better.
Right. It's very important. You know, it's like reading. You know, those who won't read are as bad off, even worse probably, than those that can't read. If you have a skill and don't use it, if you have an opportunity like being involved in your government at the various levels, and the one way that every citizen can be involved is by being a voter and helping to make the decisions of who will be the office holders. Now, you know, there are winners and losers, and you've got to accept that. And if you lose, you've got to plan to come back another day and maybe do better. You know, who knows?
Right.
It is hard being a public official. I have been a public official. I was on the school board here for 6 years.
Let me tell the voters how you got on the school board, because that was
Okay.
very unique.
Yeah, it was really sort of unique.
This woman sitting next to me was a write-in candidate for school board, and she got more votes, I believe, than some of the people who were on the ballot. Is that right? I think you got 1,300 votes?
Yeah, my memory is it was 1,300. And of course, a write-in vote is a different sort of thing.
There were 1,300 people who wrote this woman's name on the ballot.
Yeah, or tried to write it somewhere.
In this small town was just astounding, and that's a testament to your own activism and your own reputation in this community.
That's true.
Blew the mind of so many people who did not know you as well as I did. I would expect that, but I didn't think that many people would write your name in.
That's true, Wenda. But you know, you have to come up with the end.
Oh, yes,
You know what the end was?
Tell me.
The voters set me free, finally.
They set you free?
They did.
Oh, congratulations. You served how many years?
6 years. 6 years. And when I ran for the 4th time, someone else won. So
that's
but
okay.
I had my opportunity to work on the local school board and also on the Tri-County Vocational School Board in Nelsonville for those 6 years. And as a person who has been trained as a teacher and been a teacher and been a student for my whole life, really, I really thought that was a good job for me to try to work on. But, you know, it is difficult because you cannot please everyone. It's absolutely impossible. Some people, if you don't agree with them, think you must be taking money from the other side. You know, I don't know that anyone baldly accused me of that, but I could see it in their eyes, you know, sometimes when they didn't agree with the decision that I had made. And public officials must make decisions all the time that affect people. And especially schools are so close to people's hearts because their children are going to the schools, and if they have a problem with the schools or teachers or something, you know, they will feel it very strongly, and because they want the best for their child, and if they think their child is not getting the best for whatever reason, you know.
Well, let's go back to the fact that the voters set you free. One of the things I think I want people to know is that it's a success if you run for office. The very fact that you were willing to put your name on the ballot or pay your $45 fee to register as a write-in candidate and then persuade people to vote for you as a write-in candidate, the very fact you were willing is a win for democracy. It's a win for everyone to have a choice of candidates who are willing to do what's needed to make our government work. So I applaud everyone who's willing to run for office.
And like I say,
more people. You don't really win or lose. It's just somebody has to work and somebody's set free.
Right.
That's another way to look at it.
Right, and it's good to share. But there are some people who are so good that they are elected time and time again and serve the public for a very long time and for very well. But let's talk a little bit more about women and voting. You may notice my T-shirt here. It says, "Nevertheless, she persisted." And this has to do with Elizabeth Warren fairly recently. I think it might have been last fall or maybe last winter. She's a U.S. Senator from Massachusetts. And she was making a point by reading a letter written by Coretta Scott King. Might have even been on Martin Luther King Day, Jr. I don't remember the exact time. And she's a Democrat, and she's very outspoken. And stands up for what she believes in very strongly. And somehow or other that got under the skin of Mitch McConnell, who is the head of the majority party in the Senate, which is the Republican Party. And he demanded that she stop speaking. And
she persisted.
She persisted. And I think she was escorted out at his request, which is very unusual. I've never heard of such a thing before. Anyway, she got out in the hall of outside the Senate and spoke to the press, read the letter to the press, and of course she got much more coverage than she would have had if he'd just let her continue to read her letter from about Dr. King by Coretta Scott King, his wife. So anyway, she persisted, and now we have a T-shirt which has this slogan on it. So, but in fact, she's been there. I think she has to run next year. I believe she has to run again next year. What else do I have here? Well, here's one thing. I wanted to go all the way back to the original passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. This is a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay, one of my favorite poets. This is called The Pioneer. And pioneer, you immediately think, oh, people who went west, etc. But that's not it. This is the pioneer who does something new, something new and important. And this poem that Edna St. Vincent Millay wrote in 1923, after the passage of woman suffrage, is to the women who worked for so long and so hard. 72 years from 1848, when the Seneca Falls Convention of Women was the first one that sought to get women the right to vote in New York, to 1920. 72 years they worked, but this is the pioneer. Let's see if I can read this. I tend to tear up when I read it.
Would you like me to read it instead?
Yes, that would be very nice.
Okay, this is the English teacher and me coming out.
Good. That's what we need is an English teacher.
That's what I did when I was gone from here. I did 8 years of teaching English as well.
But we have a picture of the marble statue, which was for her poem. There it is. 3 women in a bathtub. It looks like it's Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Lucretia Mott. And it's sometimes called that bit about the bathtub because it's unfinished, you see.
Yeah.
And that was because they knew that women's rights would be unfinished even with getting the right to vote.
Oh, don't we know it?
So this poem was written for this marble statue.
Okay, I'll try.
Good.
The Pioneer by Edna St. Vincent Millay. Upon this marble bust that is not I, lay the round formal wreath that is not fame. But in the forum of my silenced cry, root ye the living tree whose sap is flame. I, that was fierce and valiant, am no more, save as a dream that wanders wide and late, save as a wind that rattles the stout door, troubling the ashes in the sheltered grate. The stone will perish. I shall be twice dust. Only my standard on a taken hill can cheat the mildew and the red-brown rust and make immortal my adventurous will. Even now the silk is tugging at the staff. take up the song, forget the epitaph.
Yeah. Well, and here is my bag. I know that Matt has a picture of this close up too. This was, I went in the year 2000 up to Salem, Ohio, when they had the 150th anniversary of the first women's rights convention in Ohio, which was in 1850. So there you see the, here's the woman on the hill blowing a trumpet, and she's got a staff with a banner on it. So that's it. Take up the song. The silk is tugging at the staff. Take up the song. Forget the epitaph. But I think it's good for us sometimes to, you know, have an epitaph too. To remember people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Lucretia Mott, who were pioneers. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton met in 1840 in London at an anti-slavery conference that their husbands were attending. And they said, we ought to do something about women's rights sometime. Well, 8 years later, Lucretia Mott was visiting in upstate New York, where Elizabeth Cady Stanton was living, and they decided to have a women's rights meeting, which is why it happened in, it was in July, it was in the mid-year of 1848 in Seneca Falls, which is, you know, one of the Finger Lakes is Seneca Lake. And so that's the birthplace of the women's rights meetings in this country in 1848. And as we saw from my picture, from my bag from Salem, that idea spread quickly around the country, so that Ohio had one in 1850 already. Now, one of the things that we have in this paper, How Women Won the Vote, they take up the names of women who worked on suffrage in every state, the pioneers. These are the pioneers of women's suffrage. And this one on Ohio, I wanted to mention a couple of the women from Ohio. I think maybe it's on this previous page. Yeah, here we go, Ohio. See, what this paper does is it shows the history of the passage of women's suffrage, and because it went state by state too, before it became nationally passed as a federal amendment in 1920, 25 states at least had passed women's suffrage at the state level, at their own state level. So some of these names from Ohio are known, Belle Sherwin, for instance. Now here's one. This woman is from Southeast Ohio. Frances Dana Gage was born in 1808 near Marietta. And she was quite a gal. She had 8 children. 2 girls were first and then 6 boys, which was sort of good for her, but maybe not so good for the girls, because when she became a well-known lecturer and was going around speaking, she had 2 girls at home who could take care of the house and the younger brothers, you know. For Frances Dana Gage, her parents were original settlers of Marietta, which was the first settlement in Ohio, you know, in 1788. And she was born in 1808. And she had a triune cause. There were three things that she spoke and wrote about extensively during her lifetime. She lived until about 1870. And those three things were abolition of slavery, temperance on hard drink, and women's rights.
She lost the second.
Well, she actually, yeah, the second was voted in, temperance.
But
Mandatory temperance was voted in 1918.
I know, but long term, she
Long-term,
lost it.
yeah. In 33, that amendment was rescinded, which had banned hard liquor for sale around the country. People could make their own, but they couldn't sell it. And although people say that it failed, one thing that it did do was that it significantly cut back on drunkenness during the years that it was in force, which is something people forget. Anyway, that was Frances Dana Gage, and she wrote a wonderful poem in 1851 for the Second Women's Rights Convention that she spoke. Actually, she was in charge of the one in 1851 in Akron, where Sojourner Truth spoke. You know, that "Ain't I a Woman" speech. Frances Dana Gage was the chairman of that meeting. So she was quite a gal. Now, Harriet Taylor Upton was also very involved with women's suffrage in the days leading up to the passage of the 19th Amendment, actually. She headed the national movement for passage of the Women's Rights Amendment for the right to vote. Florence Allen, that's another very interesting woman. She is associated often with your part of Ohio where you came from Northeast Ohio. Her father was from there. She was actually born in Utah, but he was out there fairly briefly and then moved back to Northeast Ohio. And she became a lawyer, and she became a judge. In 1920, immediately after the passage of the women's suffrage, she put in her name to be a judge, a municipal judge in Cleveland. And she was elected in 1920. She was the first woman judge elected in the United States, Florence Allen. And years later, she was the first woman federal judge. She was named by Franklin D. Roosevelt to the federal bench, I think in 1937. And some people said, well, why couldn't he have named her to the Supreme Court eventually or something? You know, that didn't happen, but she was the first female federal judge in the country. So Florence Allen was cut quite a swath. And here's a woman, Victoria Woodhull. Have you ever heard of that gal?
I've heard of the name.
The name, well.
But you're the one with the history mind.
Yeah, I'm the history buff. Well, she was born in 1837. She's another Ohioan, you know. She was born in 1837 in Licking County, which is quite close by, actually. And she was a real go-getter. She and her sister were the first females who were Wall Street brokers. They were backed by, you know, one of the famous men of the time, and so on. And she did that, and she was the first woman who officially ran for president of the United States. That year was 1872.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she didn't get to first base. But her name was on the ballot. It was not one of the major parties, but there was another party. I don't think it was called the Women's Party, but it was essentially a women's rights organization. And her name was on the ballot in a few places. Victoria Woodhull.
Mm-hmm.
She finally decided to make tracks for England,
Mm-hmm.
which reminds me,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to talk a little bit about England, aren't we?
If you want to, sure.
Yeah. Where
Sure.
were you in England? What were you doing?
My husband is a career science teacher, and he got a position teaching chemistry at an American international school called the American School in Switzerland.
In
But-
Switzerland.
But this was the campus in England, which
Okay.
turned out to be the biggest campus. For short, we called it TASIS, the American School in England.
I see.
And I also got a job teaching there.
Uh-huh.
They like teaching couples, and I had spent 4 or 5 years before then, when we were gone, teaching in public schools and private schools.
Uh-huh.
So they hired me to teach 7th grade English. I was an English major as an undergraduate,
Good.
and I absolutely loved it. But
Uh-huh.
I'll tell you, it was funny if you talk about education, and I went and got a PhD focusing on education policy. My PhD
Uh-huh.
is in political science, focusing on education policy. When I was gone those 16 years, that's one of the first things I did, because I was fascinated by education policy and its effect on children. So I remember my job interview with the middle school principal. We had met the headmaster in person at a recruiting fair. And about a month later, we had phone interviews with he had one with the head of the upper school, and I had one with the head of the middle school. And I was ambivalent about leaving. I had a good job in Connecticut, working as an education policy researcher, doing sorts of things. I was ambivalent, so I did what you should do at a job interview anyway, is just let it all hang out. And so when the middle school principal asked me questions about how I would do things, I let her know. If something is too easy for a child, and I knew it's too easy for a child, I would find a way to make sure that child didn't have to do it. If there was a child who needed extra help or more time to take a test, I would make tests untimed for everybody. If the curriculum didn't quite meet the children's interest, I would change the curriculum. And how I would grade students, I might have even told her that sometimes I'll let them grade themselves.
Sometimes they're harder on themselves.
Yeah, routinely they seem to be harder on themselves.
I was a teacher once, too.
Yes. So, and that grammar was something that's real important to me. I would teach grammar. Halfway through the interview, I had said enough unusual things that she just randomly said, "Oh, thank goodness, I don't think I could take another typical teacher." And when I heard that, I knew this is a woman I want to work for.
Oh, yeah, right.
And I had a glorious 5 years working under that middle school principal.
Oh, great. Where was this
doing what I needed
located?
to do. We were located about 10 or 15 minutes south of Heathrow Airport.
Okay.
At the northern tip of Surrey.
Yeah, I know it.
We were in a small village called Thorpe.
Okay.
The church immediately next to the school was built 900 years ago, the main part of it.
Right.
It was a beautiful place to live, a beautiful campus, because the founder of TASIS, part of her philosophy was children need beauty. They really need the natural beauty around them and artwork around them. They need that. So the campus was stunningly beautiful. The tuition was sky high. We had millionaire children and billionaire children as well, from all over the world. My husband and I were dorm parents for all 5 years in a dormitory.
In a dormitory.
That had 19 teenage boys, high school boys, because the high school was half boarding and half day. And we lived on campus with these 19 boys, and each year the boys were from between 12 and 16 different countries.
Oh, really? Oh.
We got to meet all kinds of kids
Yes, I
from
would think
all
so.
over the world
Wonderful,
and watch
wonderful.
them get to know each other. Things got tense sometimes, and we had to sit down.
Politics being what
exactly. They got tense because the students were really affected by international affairs.
it is. Yes, right.
I remember one Korean crisis that was happening, and our poor Korean 16 and 17 and 18-year-old students were under the impression that they would have to leave high school and go to war.
Right.
Because apparently there was something in Korea that they could draft the 16-year-olds. So that was real painful. There were other painful times when there were a crisis in Libya. One of our former students and her mother barely got out of the country and came back and told an amazing story.
Right,
But
that's
we
international
yeah, we
life
really
for you.
loved living, and most of my students in the middle school, I would say, 60–70% were American, whose parents were stationed in England.
Yes.
Or sent there with some financial company. We had a few
Right.
military families, not many because the base was kind of far away. And then there were students from many other countries whose parents were stationed in London, and a few British students
Right.
as well.
Well, we were in England in 56, 57. Bob was a student at Oxford that particular year. And I got a job with the American Air Force. It was
Yep.
just an odd sort of thing, you know. But
Yeah, the base is near there.
there were bases near
Yes,
Oxford, you know.
yes.
There was one 30 miles this way, one 15 miles that way, one 30 miles that way kind of thing. And we had a little car. I had a VW Bug.
Oh, so you and I have something in common. We've both driven on the left side of the road.
Oh boy! And I'm telling you,
Yeah.
Wenda, I had only learned to drive the year before. Bob, my husband, taught me to drive. And so I was particularly worried when I spent a year at Fort Knox driving. Then I spent a year in England driving on the left-hand side of the road. And I was so afraid when we went back to America that I would make a fatal mistake. you
Well,
know.
I'll tell you a funny. A couple of years ago, Richard got a job offer in the Virgin Islands.
Uh-huh.
And
Do
I
they
forget
have?
which side of the Virgin Islands, but it was a side where they drove American cars on the left side of the road. And I thought, wait, I can do a left-handed car on the left side of the road and a right-handed car on the right side of the road, the ones that belong for that.
Yeah.
But my brain just cannot cross over and do a third kind of driving. So we turned down that job for other reasons too, but it was just not going to work out.
It was not in the cards.
No, I've already gotten driver's licenses in 2 countries. I
Well,
don't need
that
to
was
try
an
another.
interesting year. I was teaching actually U.S. servicemen who didn't have high school diplomas and needed more basic education in order to get a GED, possibly, from high school. And so that was an interesting, different kind of teaching that I did way back when. That would have been 56, 57. And that was one year we were there.
Yeah.
Then we were there also in 70, 71. And at that time we were in southwest London, very close to to the edge of London, but on the River Thames.
You know, there's one other thing I thought. You mentioned the 70s. When I was first married, and I'm saying this because of women and voting.
Yeah, women and voting. Let's get back to that because we're
The
just about
topic.
done.
Yeah, I know. When I was first married in January of 1975, I was 20 years old, and I found out a few months later that what the Board of Elections did back then is they automatically unregistered every woman who got married.
Because they wanted them to register with the husband's name.
Yes, they wanted you to come in and re-register with your new name. There was one slight problem. I didn't take my husband's name. I was still Wenda Sheard.
Yeah.
I was disenfranchised for no reason in the year 1975 by the Board of Elections.
Yeah. And
That's
they wouldn't listen to your argument?
No, I talked to a federal judge who also had kept her own name. I saw her in a restaurant, a friend of the family, and she explained to me who to contact to make change. So my letter was part of the testimony given in Columbus, as I understand it, at the state legislature to change the procedures so that women were no longer unregistered the minute they got married.
Yeah, yeah.
That placed an unfair burden on women. It never should have happened. But
so
that's what it was.
One and all, we're just about done here. I thank Wenda very much for coming and talking about all the different things we've discussed. And I want to remind everyone to remember that, I believe it's Saturday, August 26th, is Women's Equality Day because it is the anniversary of the women's right to vote, the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in the year 1920. Thank you. This is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday.